All right, so two things are going around. One of them is the hotkey and definition sheet. So you should have a hotkey and a definition sheet. Yes? Yes. Which one? Control is command and alt is option. Yep. Um, you'll find you want to use the hotkeys as much as possible. Everything in After Effects is terrible to get to if you don't have hotkeys that you're using. Just like Photoshop, just like Illustrator, use the hotkeys. They'll actually become so second nature that you won't even remember the hotkeys. When people ask you, you'll have to go to a keyboard and try to figure out what your hands do when you need to get that hotkey. Yes. Usually that's what happens. Someone says, what's the hotkey for that? And I say, hold on. It's that. Whatever my middle finger does right there. The other thing going around is the cheat sheet. This is a good way to keep organized and keep your stuff situated correctly. Some of our projects will get very big. We are not going to be working with a single file typically ever. Okay? Maybe the first assignment, second assignment we will. But after that, everything is going to have stuff that we'll be adding into After Effects. So you want to make sure everything stays nice and organized. So this is how I want your stuff organized. We'll go through this even further. Our goal today initially is to just make sure that we're starting off with organization. That way we know all of our stuff is organized at the start. Next time we'll do it again, next time we'll do it again, and then after that you should be responsible enough to remember to keep yourself organized throughout the semester, okay? So first thing we're going to do is we're going to make a folder for ourselves. On these computers, how many people have never used a Windows computer? Okay, good. On these computers there's a C drive. You do not write anything to the C drive. The desktop is on the C drive, so don't write anything to the desktop. When you reboot the computer, the C drive and the desktop gets wiped and restored. So if you were to work off the desktop, which happens all the time, and then the computer crashes, your work is gone. Okay, so never, ever, ever work off of the desktop. You are going to work off of, on your computer, there's a P drive. So if you want extra hotkeys, get your pencil out and start writing down. Window E is Explorer, and that will just pop open the Explorer and bring you right to where your hard drives are, okay? Also in the left side, there's hard drives there. So you're going to go to the P drive. I don't have a P drive, I have a D drive, so we're just going to pretend that that's the P drive. Okay? Now in here, you're going to make a folder. On your cheat sheet, you'll see where it says external project organization. We're not there yet, but that's where eventually we're going to get to, okay? We first have to make a folder for our name, because on these computers throughout the day, people will be working. So we're going to make a folder. We're going to call it your last name underscore 1900 underscore F18. It's a secret code. Nobody will be able to break it. Okay, so Sarcona is mine. Don't put Sarcona for yours. 1900, which is the name of the class, and then fall 18, so we know the semester, right? If you have other classes with me, you may want to make a main folder, so like a Sarcona folder, and then put your stuff inside there, or you can keep them separated. I think it's easier to keep them separated. That way you know which class you're working in, okay? All right. Right. Also, if you're new to PCs or you're newer, you just haven't been around this much, on a Mac, when you take one folder and you drag it into a spot where that folder exists, the Mac will delete the old folder and put the new folder in there. Sort of. Sometimes what happens is you have a folder that has files in all these folders. Over here, you may only have one of those files. And so when you drag it, everything gets deleted and you just have the one. On PCs, they merge the folders together. Okay? So if I were to have this folder and that folder and I just drag it, it'll say, you know, they exist. Do you want to merge them? And it'll just merge the folders together. Anything that is the same name will get overwritten, but everything that's new will just get added to that group. Okay? So just be aware that there is a difference, especially if you do go between Mac and PC. Okay, so we have our class folder. Now we need to create a project folder. Our first project is going to be our title card. Everything that you do needs to have your name on it. So I put Sarcona underscore title card. Okay, and if you look at the cheat sheet, it says project organization, your last name underscore project name, Sarcona underscore title card. Okay. Our next thing we're going to do is go inside that folder and make all those other folders that are right there. So you can just go inside there and make all those other folders. Nope, the artwork, audio, movies, output. So what we're going to be using these folders for, what do you think we're going to use the artwork folder for? Yep. So any of the artwork that we bring into After Effects, we may have a reference, whatever it is, or not a reference, but we may have stuff that we are bringing into After Effects. That's what's going to go inside artwork. Yep. If we had any 3D stuff, we put those in there too. What about audio? Sound. Hey, audio. Movies. Any movies we bring into After Effects. And then output. Any movies we take out of After Effects. Okay? So After Effects is basically, think of Illustrator, like you drew something in Illustrator. Now you want to animate it. In order for someone else to be able to see it, we have to make it into a movie file. That's where the output would be. Okay? And then reference is just, I did sketches, I want to put them in there. I have stuff that I may not use in my actual thing, I just throw those in there. Okay? So it's pretty straightforward what those should mean. And then our main After Effects files, I like to keep them just right here. Unless you get really crazy with how many files you have, I don't. Usually I'll have 1, 2, or 3 files for like a class like this. Bigger projects I have more, but typically for this I only have a couple. You could make another folder in there that says After Effects files if you wanted to, okay? All right, so we're going to go back to our previous folder. If you want another hotkey, the backspace key is the back key, which is, again, awesome. Now, this external project organization, do you think we're going to use this for any other projects? Right, every project. Yeah, of how we're going to set up everything. So, do you like to do extra work or less work? Less work, right, always the best answer. So we already have this set up for title card, so why not copy it and make it template, and then every time we make a new project, all we have to do is duplicate that folder structure and rename it. That makes sense, right? Okay, so Control-C, Control-V, and then just rename that to template. Okay, now the tricky part that people forget is that we have to duplicate the template folder on the next project and not work out of the template project. Okay, so make sure we don't do that. All right, so now we're going to open up After Effects. All the ones on these computers should be fine. On mine, I'm going to show you how you can do this, and you probably already know this. What's the hotkey for all the Adobe apps if you want to reset the preferences? You got 2 of them right. Control-Alt-Shift. Okay, so you would hold Control-Alt-Shift or Command-Option-Shift. Yes, ma'am?
So are these updated to the current version?
Yes.
One that's completely updated?
No, as long as you're on CC, you'll be fine. When we go before CC, then things get tricky, but everything for what we're doing is going to be good. Right. Right, and it will if you are. So I'm going to hold Control-Alt-Shift and open After Effects. You don't have to do that because yours are already reset. If you're at home and something doesn't look right, you may want to do that just so that your After Effects stuff gets reset back to the defaults. And it comes up with this pop-up that says, are you sure you want to delete your preferences? I will hit OK. The only difference, the people that have their own computers, is on these computers there are some plugins. Trapcode, which is one that they mentioned in the video, that's one that is installed on these computers. It's not required, but you'll see some of the benefits of it when we get to that point. We're not there yet. And then that's pretty much it. On CC20, this is 2018 point something. Let me get the exact number. This is Adobe sucks, number one. So this is Adobe After Effects CC 2018, but the version for After Effects is 15.12. All right, it makes no sense. But anyway, one of the iterations of After Effects removed a bunch of stuff from the After Effects rendering. So you'll see how to do it. It'll still work across the board. Yes, ma'am. Red Giant. They are not free. I have to check. I think they might be free for students if you send them an email, but I'll double check and see. The Red Giant Trapcode ones are basic foundational industry experience things that you want to at least get under your belt. However, everything that you do should be done in a way to understand what it's doing before you try to go to find a plugin, because some companies don't have plugins, okay? The ones you saw in the video, they've got enough clientele and enough base to, support all of that. Some companies don't. And so you may go into a company that uses After Effects, but they have nothing except for bare bones After Effects there. Some of them are like $1,000 for a plugin, and they just don't have the budget for a $1,000 plugin that needs to be updated every year. So you should try to do everything as much as you can on your own, and then once you understand it, then you can go out and find a plugin. We'll get more into this as we get further on, but there's a website called AE Scripts, and you can write that down. This is a plugin site, a script site, and what it allows you to do is download a lot of really cool plugins for After Effects. And what's really neat about it is the kind of things that are out there. Ease. So like this one, let's say. So this is change default easing for After Effects. You'll see the price here is $4.99, but if you read a little bit further, it says name your own price. A lot of these, not all of them, are basically name your own price. You can literally put in $0 and get the plugins for free. Now that doesn't help you. If you are constantly using a plugin, you got to pay it forward or pay it back to these people because they're spending the time to make your job easier. Yes, ma'am. No, you don't have to worry about it yet. We won't actually get into it for a few assignments. Okay. When we do get into it, I would recommend it because you do want to at least have some experience with it. Yep. So things like this are great. You want to, be able to at least see what's out there. If you're constantly doing something, maybe, yeah, this would be a helpful one to have. If this is something you're always using, I would go there and give them something because that's how, they justify their time spent creating these little scripts. There's even some that are like not name your own price. Like Newton is a not name your own price one. You'll see this one is $250 for that one license. But what it can do is pretty awesome. You basically animate stuff. And then Newton is a physics engine that does that kind of thing. So it can actually create these kind of interactive, bouncy things and falling things. There it is. They're showing. And then you hit play, and then it automatically will react to what is a static object and what is a moving object. And so they're not hand keyframing all those items. They're just hitting play, and then the dynamics in the system are taking over, kind of like a video game would. Yeah. So for $250, it's pretty decent. But you got to be able to justify $250 for this one, and then $1,000 for that one, and $600 for this one. It's a lot. It adds up quick. Okay. Cool. So this is how After Effects typically starts up. The same way pretty much all the Adobe apps start up. There's a little pop-up screen. You can always go to the Learn, and I do recommend, especially if you're new to anything, is to just get some background stuff. As a student, I always like to be ahead of the game. So before we got to learning about compositions, let's say, I would do a little bit of reading or watch at least a video on it so that when we talked about it in class, it made a little bit more sense, okay? And these are like 3-minute, 5-minute videos, so it definitely helps just to kind of like watch one. I'm just going to close that. Okay, we don't need that main window there. The interface for After Effects can be a little bit confusing if you've never done video before. If you have done video, it's a little bit less confusing, but it's still kind of like tricky for a lot of people. The biggest thing to be paying attention to is under Window, Workspace, Reset. Because typically what happens is we hit Windows, they close, things go away, they disappear, and then we don't know how to get things back. So if I accidentally started closing Windows and I don't know how to get any of this stuff back, and I just want to basically reset it, oh look, that crashed it. I didn't crash it. Anytime you go to Effects and Presets, it takes 2 minutes because it's loading. So then I just say reset, and then everything goes back to default. Okay, so we have our external project organization. Further down, you'll see the internal project organization there. So these are all folders that we want to create over here in this project area, okay? So we're just going to either right-click and go to New Folder, or we're going to click on the New Folder down here. Nope, just close that window on the top right. Yep.
Then just go to Workspace.
Nope, right here. Just go right there and then say New Folder. And then make a new folder for each one of these things. Compositions. If they start nesting themselves inside the previous folder, don't worry about that. Just let it do it. All right, so if your folder's nested, it's not a huge deal. You just drag them out. Okay, so some people get freaked out when that happens, and don't get freaked out. So the project area is where all of our stuff is going to go. So when we bring in artwork, when we bring in audio, when we have what are called solids in After Effects, when we have compositions, all of those will be housed right there. Who's used Premiere or Avid before? Okay, so you know bins, right? That's typically where your bins would be, is up there. Unlike those software though, you can't pop them out and have different things going. Like that's the only window we have. So anytime we want something, we have to keep going back to that window. You'll find your screen real estate is always getting eaten up by After Effects because this is where we're going to see our stuff happening. Most of the stuff will happen down here that we're like tweaking settings. And then over here we have other areas we'll be tweaking settings. So typically having a second screen, sometimes even a third screen, can be very helpful, okay? So if you're at home or you're here, try to utilize that second screen to have other stuff going on. You can drag palettes to the other side or panels or whatever it is. Sometimes when you're really like in the zone, you'll take your whole screen, like the video area, and slide that to the other screen. And that way all your settings are here while your video's on the other one. But that'll be for another time. Okay, so that's that. We've created all these folders. Let's rename this. So we're going to go to File, Save As, Save As. And we'll put this into our title card folder. And I will just call it Sarcona _ title card _ 001. Okay, so I went to the P drive, I went to my folder, I went to title card, and I'm calling it Sarcona title card 001. Cool. Spoiler alert, we do. So that's what I was going to get to, is that we don't want to have to do this again. So yes, let's save not a blank copy, but a copy with all of our folders already set up there, right? So let's do another save as. And then we'll put that inside of our template folder, and we'll just call that template 001. If at any point you get stuck, you get lost, you start falling behind, you have to stop me, because I will just continue going, and then you'll still be on creating the folders while we're like making awesome animations, okay? Everyone's good? All right. Should we start working on our title card now? Because why? Because why? We're in template, right? So we've saved this as template. We can't start working in here, so we have to go and open that first. Now you can go to Open Recent. That's the easiest way to do it. Or you can go to Open Project and then navigate to it. Okay. So now we can start to get an idea of the interface. Our first animations are not going to be beautiful. These are actually not going to be a title card as the first animation we're doing. We're not going to do a title card as our first animation. We're going to start playing around inside of After Effects so we can get comfortable with setting keyframes and moving and navigating and whatever else before we actually start doing a title card, okay? Let's start talking about what things are at, where things are at. Let me pop open my folder here. Like fall print 1900. Where are my hotkeys at? 1200 hotkeys. Maybe it's under this. Maybe it's under winter. Winter. 1900. Cheat sheet. Hotkeys and definitions. There we go. Woo. All right, so all the toolbar, the main toolbar, is right at the top of our window. And you can see all the little hotkeys right there. You'll also notice that a lot of these are grayed out right now. We don't have a document, okay? All we have is a project. We basically have an empty folder inside of After Effects, but there's nothing inside the folder to actually do anything with. So everything is grayed out, okay? So just so you can see what they are, obviously you have the selection. That should be the same thing you've used from Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign, just that arrow, right? And you know, if I were to cover up this hotkey, it doesn't work with a projector, but if I were to cover it up, you know what the hotkey is, right, for selection stuff? V, right? It's right there. And then hand tool, same thing that you would see in the other ones. It does the same exact thing. It allows you to move the document around. It doesn't actually move the document around. It moves like the zoom or the magnification of where you're at. There's a zoom tool, which is a magnifier. A rotation tool. Don't use the rotation tool. I never use a rotation tool, but it's there, okay? Camera tools we'll get into. They don't do anything yet. Pan behind tool. We will use it for anchor point, which you'll see. Rectangle tool, pen tool, some typing tools, cloning tools, puppet tool, okay?
Pen tools is the only one out of that list that looks a little bit different compared to the rest. Illustrator and Photoshop is P.
Correct, and that's what I was going to bring up. After Effects, for whatever reason, decided to throw a curveball, and the pen tool is G, not P. So that will just screw you up, I'm sure, because they did that. So just remember it's G and not P.
Don't let that transfer to the other two.
Right. I don't even know what they are in the other two.
I think it's gradient, if I'm correct.
Gradient, yes, gradient. See, I'm not even in the software, so my brain is not on that. There's some ways to zoom in and out. There's rulers inside of After Effects. There's some other things. Keep this sheet. All right, back on track. All right, so keep your hotkey list with you. Keep it at the side, make notes on it every single day, not just today because I handed them out and you're too lazy to put them in your binders yet. We want to keep these out all the time. You will find extreme speed in After Effects if you use your hotkeys, trust me. Those are Windows ones, yes. Now, like I said, the control would be command on the Mac and then alt will be option. But everything else where you have these like single letters, that's just straight up the single letters. Okay.
How do you do a double U? Like UU for that show modified properties.
Super quick. What's funny is they say, how do you do a W? All right. If you had a tomato. All right, so we want our hotkeys. There's the menu bar. This is our project area. This is where we're going to see all of our artwork stuff, okay? You do use it, but it's not like Illustrator or Photoshop where you're constantly up there. A lot of what we're going to do in After Effects is changing properties, okay? And that's going to happen down here in the timeline. So when we animate something, we will set a keyframe, we'll adjust our time, we'll set another keyframe, and then we'll be able to tween in between those two keyframes. Palettes are over here, just like every other Adobe project. And then obviously you have your main bars up there. You will get very acclimated to this if you use the hotkeys, if you are exploring different ways to get to them. These are all of the effects. There's like a trillion effects in here. We will not touch on all of these or even half of them because there's so many different things. As you get more comfortable with After Effects, as you explore different tutorials, you'll see how different people use them.
Just in case something gets reset or whatever, what workspace is this default?
Just the standard one. So if you just say reset default, that's the default one right there. I think standard is also the same thing, except it adjusts where these are at, I guess. So yeah, either one's fine. Cool. So let's create a composition. So this is a composition is something where we actually have an animation inside. It's kind of like your document inside of After Effects. You can't do anything without a composition. So go to Composition and go to New. Pay attention to the hotkey for it because at some point you may want to make or use that hotkey. All right, so this pops up. This is our composition. It needs to know what kind of file we have. What is our document, right? So the name of this will just be playing around. Playing around. There will be a bunch of settings. What was that? Don't hit enter, correct. Don't hit enter yet. The presets here, there's a bunch of different presets. And these are going to be dictated by where your video is going to end up. So if you're going to put your video on a TV versus a phone versus another device, that's where this would show up or where you could tweak this stuff. The setting that we're going to use is not in the presets, okay? So we have to actually type it in. So we're going to uncheck the lock aspect ratio, just in case. And on your sheet, you'll see where it says 960 by 540. So you're going to type in 960 in the width, 540 in the height. Don't hit enter. Okay, now just so you know where that number comes from, your TV at home, unless you have like something newer, is probably like a 1920 by 1080 resolution TV, right? So it's a 1080p is what it's referred to. This is half of that. Now, if we were to do any of our work at 1920 by 1080, that means that basically like if you opened a Photoshop drawing and you tried to draw something and then you opened another one and drew something, another one and drew something, so all of these would be basically individual files. The bigger the resolution, the slower it's going to go. Mm-hmm. It would be proportioned for it. Yep. So all the sizing is basically we're looking at proportions. So After Effects is vector based. So if I set this to 960 by 540 and later I decide I want this to be 1920, I can just resize everything and do some other stuff, and then it'll pretty much fit, okay? So we want to work at 960 by 540. It's a good enough resolution that it is will be seen well on the computers. It's also formatted for widescreen. It's not super widescreen. I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember, but TVs used to be like square, and then they got widescreen, and now they got super widescreen, so we still have the black bars. So depending on what you're doing, you'd want to know what that end result is. Every project we do in here, 960 by 540 will be our end resolution, okay? Minus one assignment. Everything else will be that. We also have pixel aspect ratio, and this may sound weird of why you wouldn't want to have square pixels. Basically, the reason for that is that some screens will actually like stretch out the image, okay? And so you may have squished pixels on your screen, and then when it plays, it fixes it, okay? So we're always going to leave it as square. For our frame rate, we're going to keep it at 30. Okay, so if you look at your cheat sheet, it says 960 by 540 at 30 frames per second. So we're good. That's what we're going to set every single time. We don't need to worry about drop frame. We have the resolution set to full. After Effects can get very slow because it's constantly like every time we hit the play button, it's going to constantly be like creating frames. It can go really slow. So it has this resolution here. Basically, you can say, I want to preview it at a lower resolution so that way it'll play quicker, okay? We can change this later, so you can just leave it at full for now. We also have a start time code. This should be set to all zeros. And then we have a duration, which is currently set to 30, okay? Now, do you want to guess what 30 that is? Is it 30 hours, 30 minutes, 30 seconds? 30 seconds, okay? So that time code, it goes hours, minutes, seconds, frames, okay, starting from the left. So if I wanted to make this 15 seconds, I could erase everything and just type 1500 and I would have 15 seconds. We're going to leave it at 30, but that's how we could do it, okay? We also have a background color. The background color is the color of whatever the back of our comp is. It means nothing except for the, what we're going to see there. Typically, you'll have an image that you'll put behind it or a solid you'll put behind it, but typically you'll start off with just black as your default. Okay, so here's what we've changed. Go ahead. No, the duration should stay at 30. That should be fine. So we changed the name. We changed the width and the height to 960 by 540. Our frame rate is 30. And then the duration we left at 30 seconds, okay? Typically, those are the areas you will hit on every single time you come into this window. Some of our compositions will be 5 seconds, some will be 30 seconds, some will be 2 minutes, let's say. So we'll always kind of figure out what that is. You can change any of these settings after. If you screw up, you can always get it back. So we'll hit OK. So now that we have a composition, we have this black screen. That black screen is where we are going to do any of our work that we do. The second we created that, you'll notice that the icons at the top also are illuminated now, so we could grab any of those icons if we needed to. Also down here, this is the timeline. That became active too. You see how it says playing around right there. So now that is active. We have 0 seconds here. This blue ticker is our time. So that's like where we're currently at. We're at 0 seconds in our animation. And this goes all the way to 30 seconds all the way down here. Okay? So that's where our animation is. If we want to preview something, we can just slide that blue ticker anywhere or click and drag anywhere in this area to get that blue ticker to jump to that spot. Okay? So don't think you have to actually click on it and drag it. We don't have anything yet, obviously, right? Let's put something in there. After Effects has a couple different things you can create to start working. One of them is called a solid. Okay? If you go under Layer, New Solid, that's where that is. Or you can hit Control Y. And you'll see, or Command Y if you're on a Mac. And you'll see it's very easy to do that because it's, Control Y, Command Y versus having it up there. I did. I hit Control Y. Okay, so Layer, New Solid. That's one way to get to it. This gives you a name of a solid. Hit Control Y again. Control and then Y. down there, and then do that again. There you go. Some of the hotkeys may not work if you're not clicked in the right area. Make sure my volume's down here. There we go. All right. We have in this the name of it. So we're just going to call this ground. We also have a width, a height, the units, which are pixels, the pixel aspect ratio, square pixels, and then we have a color on there too. So for most things, again, you can adjust this later, you can tweak it, modify it, whatever. I typically leave this at the default size, okay? So whatever my comp is, that's typically how big I make my solid, okay? So I typically just change the name. I'm also going to pick a different color, so I'm going to click on the color swatch and just pick something that looks more like a ground color. So that's a good browny yellowy color, and then hit OK. You can pick whatever color you would like. You can always change the color, so if you decide later on I want it to be more yellow or less yellow or whatever, you can pick it later. If you want green, whatever, okay? Once that's created, you'll notice we have our first item in our timeline. So we have something called ground in our timeline. This has an eyeball next to it. You can guess what the eyeball does. It has some other buttons here, some other buttons here, and then it has this. That red bar that's right there is the duration of that solid, okay? So that solid is going to exist for the duration of our entire animation. It starts at 0, it ends at 30. Double click on your ground layer. Okay, so right down here, just double click it. What changed? Right. So now instead of the ground being up here, and this, it says layer ground, and then there's this red bar right there. This is going to screw you up for the first 2 or 3 weeks because everyone typically double clicks the layer and then stuff isn't playing back correctly, okay? So just be aware that when you see this red bar up here, that means you're looking at that layer and not the composition. It's kind of like Illustrator when you double click and it goes into like the clipping mask, it goes into that layer, same thing. So make sure we close that by clicking that little button there. So now we're back to just looking at the composition. Cool. All right. Let's move this down. So if we're in our selection tool, which is by default, and we click and drag this down, I'm going to hold shift so it goes straight. And I'm just going to put this down to like where the ground would be, like right there. Okay, so I'm going to click and drag. You'll notice the importance of holding shift after you start dragging, because otherwise it will deselect. So you click, drag, hold shift, and then it straightens it out. Drag first, just right here in the middle. Yep. And then hold shift. There you go. You will make mistakes. The biggest thing is to be aware of the mistakes you're making and to correct them. So a couple people did this that I saw and they undid it and noticed it right away. If I drag from here down, that's moving the item. What happens if I drag from here down? Right, I'm scaling it, okay? So just be aware that those are two different things. That's distorting it. So if I had a picture of a dog, my dog would then be squishy. So I will move the layer down, so now it's more of a ground, okay? Now, there should be somewhere that it says exactly where this is. Illustrator and Photoshop don't really keep track of exact locations of things. After Effects has to because that's how we animate. So there's actually like an X and a Y location for where this layer exists. If you look at your hotkey sheet and you look at layers hotkeys, there's one for position. What's the layer position hotkey? P, right? So if we just hit the letter P, we should be able to see the position of this layer. And so my position, it doesn't matter if yours that matches mine exactly, is 480 by 702.5, okay? So how big was our composition? 960 by 540, okay? So if I cut 960 in half, what is that? 480, right? Okay, so if my composition left and right is not perfectly lined up, then this wouldn't be 480, okay? So if I had this off, like I accidentally moved it, whoops, and I'm trying to get it back to being perfectly centered, I know that halfway this way is halfway marker, so I can just click on that and type 480 and it'll pop it back to where it's supposed to be. All of these things you see in blue, you can click and drag right on them. Don't click and then try to click and drag. You just click and drag in one swipe and it allows you to adjust it. So if I go to this, this is the X, which is left and right. This is Y, up and down. If I click and drag on this Y, you can see how I can adjust just the Y position to get that lined up to where I need to, okay? So out here, yeah, I definitely had no problem just kind of moving that down, holding shift, getting into position. Most of the time though, I come right here. I'll hit position, I'll go to that Y value and just scoot it down. That way I'm pretty much guaranteed not to offset it to the side, because that's not something I want to do, okay? You can also use your mouse scroller, like there is a zoom tool. Typically I use the mouse scroller to zoom in and out, okay? So you can try that for a second. Whee! Wonderful. There's also an area right here that says exactly what the zoom is. So sometimes you may want it to be fit because you're kind of like popping between two different resolutions. So you may want to say fit and then it'll automatically fit it perfectly. You can just set it back to fit when you're done, yeah. Sometimes I want to adjust it or whatever. This is why you may want this to be bigger or smaller. As you get more layers stacked up in here, this thing will be like huge. Like on my, over summer I went on a road trip and I did all my editing in After Effects to show off this road trip, and every picture that I have is a separate layer. Every animation I have of my path, like going from this city to that city, that's another layer, another layer, another layer. So there's like layers all over the place. So I probably have like at least 150 layers in this composition. So this area can get very full, okay? And usually what happens is we're trying to like sync things up together so that when the ball bounces and squishes, that something else is like happening too at the same time. All right, so there's our ground. I want to lock the ground. I'm happy with the position of the ground. So I'm going to click on the lock that's on the side of it there. Okay, so I click the lock, it's locked. We also need to do a little bit of organization. When we created our composition playing around, do you see where it went inside of our project window? Okay, it didn't go into our compositions folder. That's why we made that compositions folder. So we should drop playing around into the compositions folder. Cool, so that's organized. All right, so now let's create a shape. Now if I have a solid, I can go back to layer, new solid, and make a brand new solid and everything is happy, that's fine. But a solid is very limiting. It's basically just like one color, here it is, and then you can add stuff to it. Don't do this yet, but I'm just going to show you. If I make a solid, if I click in the right window, make a solid, I can go to my effects and I can generate stuff like, I'll generate something annoying so you can see what not to generate. Lightning. There we go. Okay, lightning. Okay, so I made a solid and then I made lightning, and so now the lightning is on that solid, but the solid's invisible. Okay, so you can do stuff like that with solids. There's another way to create stuff inside of After Effects, which are called shapes. And shapes are pretty much like you would see inside of Illustrator or Photoshop, basic, squares, circles, whatever. Up here next to the pen tool, you'll see the rectangle tool. Those are shapes. So I'm going to click on the rectangle tool, and I'm going to draw a square. And what am I going to hold down to make sure it's perfectly square? Shift, right? So after you start dragging, then you can make a square. And there we go. Okay, so make a square. The size of it isn't terribly important right now. Just kind of get it, roughly sized in there. You can change the shapes later. So it's just like the pen tool. I can go in there and tweak any of the points that I need to make it rounded or whatever. When we created a shape, it makes a shape layer. On this one shape layer, I can have a bunch of different shapes. So let's say I wanted to have this gear system. I could actually have 25 different gears on this one layer, and that will help me stay organized because all my gears are on this one area, okay? So I want to take this square now, and I want to be able to rotate it on its side, okay, like tip it over. So I'm not going to use the rotate tool. I could use the rotate tool, but I don't like using it, okay? So just ignore the rotate tool. Looking at our hotkey list, there's layers. The shape layer is still a layer. What is the hotkey for rotation? R. Not the rotate tool. This rotation. Okay, so we hit R. So I want this to be, here is my item. I want it to be able to do that. Okay, so like that. So I'm going to test out the rotation. There's two numbers here. The left one is revolutions. What is a revolution? Well, it's rotation. They're all spinning. What is it? How many times it what? It turns, right? All the way around, right? So one revolution is all the way around. So you can consider it, you know, a full circle, okay? The next number is degrees. So how many degrees are in a circle? 360. That was a trick question because there are 180 degrees in a circle, but there's also 360. That's like the full thing, right? So we want to take the right value and click and drag it and see what happens. Oops. Okay, so that's not what I want to happen, right? That's not how it should be rotating. So I'm going to reset this back to 0. And what is the issue? Why is it not rotating the way that I want it to? No, I'd still be rotating the whole thing. Anchor point, right? Where it's pivoting from is why it's doing that. So right now I have my square, its pivot is over here. So as it rotates, it's rotating around this like hinge that's like way over here. I need to move that hinge right to the corner, that way it'll pivot right from that spot, okay? So back to our hotkey sheet. Which one is anchor point? Why? This is where it's going to trick you up because there's two spots. Tools up here, we want to get to the anchor point tool, or anchor point on the layer. We want to get to this one to tweak it, okay? So it's Y. Why? Why do you want to know that? This is the anchor point here. That little crosshair circle thing in the middle, that's where it's pivoting from. So I'm going to click and drag that. All right, so I want to click and drag this crosshair, and I want to get it exactly on that corner there. So what should I do to get it there? Shift's not doing it. In any computer, there's 3 hotkeys every software uses. Control, Shift, and Alt, right? So if Shift doesn't do it because Shift is just constraining it left and right, up and down, I can try Alt. That's not doing it. Or I can try Control. And you'll see Control actually will snap it, okay? Once you know, like, I know I've learned softwares throughout, and you'll find so many similarities between all of them. Typically, Control, Alt, and Shift are constant hotkeys in all of them. So if you're trying to do something, even if you don't know the hotkeys, try any one of those 3 or combinations of those, and sometimes that'll work. Okay, so I drug with my pivot point anchor tool, and I hold Control, and it snaps it. And you'll notice that it snaps it to any one of those points, and it'll also snap it to the center. Okay. Now, if you're in an older version of After Effects, I'm not sure which version it was they added that. That wasn't a thing. And there was actually a tool that you would have to download that would let you do that, okay? That should have been something by default, but it's not. All right, so we have our pivot point in the bottom corner. So now I should be able to hit R again. or if it's not up there. And then I should be able to see how it rotates perfectly on that corner. So now we need to move this to the ground because it can't really like pivot in the middle of air, right? So how do we move this to the ground? Because it's not moving. We hit V, right? Make sure we're in the right tool. So we hit V and we drag this to the ground. There is no hotkey to get this object to snap to the other object. This is just an eyeballing thing. So just move it to the ground and then keep it off to the side, okay? So you have like basically kind of dividing this into thirds. This is like on one of those third lines here. There we go. All right. We may want to adjust some of the colors of this too. This is actually like a pretty ugly box. When you click on that shape, up at the top it says fill. Notice how the word fill is in blue. There's a color red. There's the word stroke that's also in blue. There's the color white. And then there's 2 pixels. Okay? So those are all the settings for what this box looks like. So if you click on the color for the red, obviously you can pick a different color. So I'm going to go with blue. And then I'm going to get rid of the stroke because I don't want the stroke on there. So I click the word stroke, and then I say no stroke. And then I may have to adjust my position of the box. Just nudge it down. So there we go. You just click right on the word stroke and then go to the far left one that has the little slash on it. Yep. You could also take the stroke down to 0 pixels, and that would also get rid of the stroke too. Either way. You could also have something with no fill. You can do gradients on the strokes, gradients on the fills. The same kind of thing you would do in the other softwares. Cool? Everyone's happy still? Cool. All right, so now we want to animate this thing just tipping over, okay? So we're going to allow a little bit of time first, okay? So I don't want to do this right at 0. I'm going to go up to like 10 frames and then I'll do it. I like to have, kind of a resting phase. It does it and then it's done, okay? So I'm just going to slide this blue marker up to about 10 frames. You can see the time right here. It says 10 on the very left, okay? So if you drag that to about 10, you're good. If it's 9, not a big deal. If it's 11, not a big deal. You'll find animation is not a precise thing. At the same time, it's very precise. Like what looks good, and what doesn't look good typically either like is totally out of left field, doesn't look good at all, or it just feels off some, okay? So sometimes you literally are like moving your keyframes, like 1 frame here, does that look good? 1 frame here, does that look good? And you're constantly going back and forth with this like 1 frame back and forth trying to find out what works. All right, so I want to take this square and I want to rotate it so that it tips over. So I'm going to go to my rotate here, and I'm going to click the stopwatch. After Effects uses what's called an auto key system. So the way that any keyframing works, we have all these attributes. If I change them, After Effects won't automatically start animating all the stuff I've changed. But the second I click that stopwatch, it says, okay, that's something you're going to animate, so any changes done to that, I will record the changes for it, okay? So we click this 1 time. That puts a keyframe right here in the timeline that says you're setting keyframes for that item. Okay? Now in order for an animation to happen, how many keyframes do I need? 1. Not 1. As many as I need, but for bare minimum. 2, right? I need a start point. I need an end point. Yes, ma'am. Once you hit the R key for opening rotation, you'll click on the stopwatch next to it. It may not look like a stopwatch, it may just look like a circle. Yeah, it's a stopwatch. On older computers, the screens were bigger, and that was a really high definition stopwatch. Not anymore. Okay, so we need at least 2 keyframes for every single thing we animate. And again, this is a sticky point for some people because they assume that they can just click the stopwatch, do stuff, and After Effects will know what to do. It doesn't. we have to say at this time I want you to be here, and at this time I want you to be there, okay? So at 10 frames, we want this cube to be right here, and that's what that diamond says. At 30 frames, so I'm just going to click and drag this up. You'll see there's no 30 frames, right, because it'll jump to a second. Oops. Yes, I want you to go to 30 frames / 1 second. Here we go. So at 1 second, you can drag this up to get to 1 second. You can drag that up to get to 1 second. You can also just click right on the number and type in 100, and that will get you to a second, okay? I'm going to take my rotation and rotate this 90 degrees. You can. You can click right on this second number and just type in 90 and hit enter. Some simple math that you should keep in mind anytime you're doing an animation. So we said the circle has a total of how many degrees? 360, right? So from here to all the way around is 360 degrees. So what is halfway? 180. And then what is half of that? And what is half of that? 45. Keep going. 22.5. Yep, typically that's as far as you need to go, okay? So those are typical numbers that you may want to keep memorized, because at some point you may need to rotate something 90 degrees or 45 degrees or 180 degrees, okay? Depending on the kind of animation you're doing. It's not crazy math, it's just those numbers. If you get those locked in, it just becomes a lot easier for you to remember that. It's kind of like when people say, oh, he did a complete 360. They didn't do a complete 360, they did a complete 180, right? That makes more sense. Cool. So we want to see what our magnificent animation looks like. So we hit play. What is the play button? Spacebar, right? So you guys should know that. Okay. So what's happening? Right, it's playing from where I stopped. So After Effects it'll play from wherever we stop, so we should probably hit the spacebar again, rewind our animation, and then hit play again. Bloop. Okay? And so now it's doing it, it's working. But every time we want to see that animation, what do we have to do? Restart. So After Effects has this cool thing called a work area. You can focus in on this spot that you're looking at, and you can look at just that spot of animation. And basically it plays it and then loops that spot over and over again. That's what we want to do. Oops. On your hotkey sheet, is there anything that says on the timeline for set the end of the work area? N. And notice what the beginning of the work area is? B. Do you notice where they are on the keyboard? Right next to each other, right? So they were a little bit smart when they did some of their hotkeys, not the pen tool, but some of them where they're, whatever the opposite is, it's right next to it, okay? So I'm going to go to, let's say, doesn't have to be exact, just about 120 or so, and I'm going to hit N to set the end of my work area. Okay, so move your ticker past that, hit N, and then notice what changes in your area of the timeline that's different now. Yeah, about that. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just somewhere past this. We never want to do it right at it because we don't get the effect, okay? We have to basically like clean our palette before we see the animation again, and that's what that does. So notice this changed, right? So when we hit N, that bar used to be all the way over there. Now it's condensed itself and is just on that side. So now if we were to hit the play button, bloop, bloop, now we can see it. No, after you hit N, yep, then that shortens your timeline. Right here, Cameron. So see this here, yours is still longer. Nope, move here, your ticker. So move it past your keyframes. And then hit N. N like Nancy. No, and that's a little bit tricky too, because end means go to the end of the composition. So yes, end like Nancy. And then if you hit the space bar, you'll see your animation. Okay, so I see your animations playing. What's missing from them? The sound effects. Not one of you made a sound effect when your animation went. Bloop. So you have to have a sound effect for it. It sounds silly, but it does help because you get the feel for what works and what doesn't work. Okay? I'm going to show you an example of what doesn't work. Don't touch yours. I'm just going to show you. As beginner animators, you don't know how long things will take. Does it take 10 frames? Does it take 20 frames? Does it take 10 minutes? So I'm going to extend this a very long time. And then I'm going to add my sound effect. Bloop. See, I lose the effect of it because that's like a really long like bloop. Right? So that's like a crazy long. If I add this maybe too fast, so I just squeeze that down there. And then I put this here. Bloop. Okay? So you get a different effect for it. And again, it sounds silly, but it does help you kind of time out how long things should take. Because eventually what's going to happen is all of your animations, when you do your demo reel, you do anything, they should be kind of like timed up to some kind of beat, music, something that's going on. And so the earlier you kind of make that connection, the easier it's going to be for you to get these things to work correctly. Okay? So I'm just going to undo that so we're all back on the same page. Okay. So now we have that. It's boring, right? We're going to jump over to YouTube for a second. Okay. So what kind of animation are we seeing here? Right. It's very linear. The speed that this rotates is the same every single frame. Okay? So what the video was saying, one of the principles, is to have it slowly start and to slowly end. Okay? So we're going to try to do that. I'm going to grab both of my keyframes. On your computers, you can grab both of those keyframes and just hit the F9 key at the top of your keyboard. The keyframes down here. So do you just have those two diamonds? You just right click or you just select them and then hit F9. I have to, because of my recording software, I have to right click, go to Keyframe Assistant, and then say Easy Ease. Okay? So they should turn to hourglasses. Go ahead. Right? So this hourglass shape means this is eased in and eased out. That's what those mean. So now if we watch the animation again, it feels a little bit different. You'll notice it's very, very subtle, right? It's difficult to see unless you see side by side what they look like. So I'm going to pause, or not play it, I'm going to pause the video. I want to duplicate this square over, and I want to be able to see what does one look like with it and what does one look like without that. Okay? So you can do this too. You're going to click on your shape layer, and you're going to duplicate it. What do we think the duplicate hotkey is? Control D. Close. Okay, I want to slide it over, so I'm just going to click and drag while I hold Shift. Okay, so I hit Control D to duplicate it, drug it over to the side while holding Shift. That way it's still on the ground. Good. You may have to zoom out too. Cool. So now we need to reset one of these back to linear so we can see what that looks like. So linear is the blocky, static motion, and then ease in, ease out is the current one. So I want to see the keyframes for the one on the right. How do I see the keyframes for that one? Where are the keyframes at? Right, but for what attribute? Rotation. So how do I see rotation? R. I'm actually afraid to make dad jokes in this class. You guys are going to attack me if I do, right? I'll say it's a pirate's favorite hotkey. Don't attack me. All right. Um, see? Can't get away with anything. So now we have our hotkeys, or our rotation there. We have the two keyframes. Now you can marquee the keyframes just like I did, clicking and dragging, that marquees them, right? The quicker way to do that is just to click on the word rotation. And that will automatically select all the hotkeys in there. So now the way you get that back is if you control-click on the keyframes, it will reset them, or command-click on the keyframes if you're on a Mac, it will reset them back to linear. So now if we do that, we should have one block that's linear, one block that is eased in, eased out, and if we hit play, then we can kind of see them side by side to see what that difference is, to see if we're really noticing anything. Okay? Now again, it's a subtle thing in this case, but it does make a huge difference. If you remember what they were saying in the video, it's a lot of the details that are going to make your stuff work, right? A lot of details are going to make this kind of pull off. And it's one of those things where someone may look at it and just kind of like, it feels off, it feels weird, especially if you have like a complex animation. We're going to exaggerate that ease in, ease out though, okay? So go to your layer that has the ease on it and click on it. So mine here has the hourglasses. That one has the ease. So I'm going to click on the layer. And then I'm going to go to the graph editor, which is this icon. Okay, graph editor right here looks like a little graph. All right, and that brings up the graph editor, which is going to show me how to tweak the keyframes for that one. Okay, so basically what's happening is it's giving it maybe a little bit of slowness at the beginning, a little bit of slowness at the end. We want to exaggerate it, so it's like really slow, super fast in the middle, and then really slow again. Okay. I don't see anything in here because I'm just selected on the layer itself. Once I click rotation, it'll populate this area with the curves of what that looks like. Oops. I clicked on rotation here and then made sure the graph was clicked. Okay, now this is also kind of like condensed. It's like squished into this area. That there, yep. No, you're good, you're there. Okay. If you click here, these buttons will zoom you in. Okay.
Are you going on break soon?
Okay. So click on your rotation, click on one of these graphs. In this case, they'll both do pretty much the same thing. They'll just pop us in that way. And that way we can see that full curve. Okay. We clicked on the rotation so we can see it, and then we clicked on that one. Do you have the graph up? Yeah. Okay, yep, that was it. Okay. So there's two kinds of graphs inside of After Effects. There's what's called a speed graph and what's called a value graph. Right now we're looking at the value graph. Not to get too math-esque here. Where's my eraser? There it is. But here is our timeline. Here are different values for that rotation. We have a value here at the start. We have a value here at the end. That's what the linear one looks like, straight. There's no smoothness there. The ease one will start off kind of low, it'll come up, and then it'll do that. That's what the ease one is going to do. For most people, it's very difficult. I'm not going to say it's very difficult to do it. For one attribute, it works fine. Okay, most people can grasp one attribute, but when we get into doing a lot of attributes at once, it becomes very tricky because sometimes you're dealing with the X, the Y, and sometimes rotations and scales and all this other stuff. So initially, we're going to start off using the speed graph. Okay, so if you right-click and you choose Edit Speed Graph, that will show you a different graph. Okay. Now this one is going to look somewhat similar. Okay. But instead of us looking at values, what we're looking at is the actual speed of the item. So before, when this was linear, the speed was just straight. It was the same speed at the start, the middle, and the end of our animation. With the easy ease, it's going to go slower, faster, and then slower. That's what that means, okay? This bump in here, wherever it's like high, that's the fastest it's going, okay? So think of it like a speedometer on your car. It's going slow here in the beginning, it's going fast in the middle, and then it's going slow at the end. What we can do is move that bump around so that we have more speed at one side versus another. Hit cancel on yours. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to adjust these handles. So what we want to do is push the hill so that the hill is further on the left side or on the right side, okay? Because I want basically it to be slow at the start, but then fast at the end, okay? So that's what we're going to do. You'll see a handle at the bottom here. There's a point. Don't touch the point. There's a circle handle. I'm just going to drag this to the right. And I'm going to drag the other one also to the right. Make sure you click on the rotation, and then that should show up. Okay, so we should notice a definite difference here, right? It actually feels like that box on the left that we've tweaked some of these keyframes, it actually feels like there's some weight to it now. Yep, sweet. When we set keyframes, we have a start point and we have an end point. That's what we're initially setting. How fast this thing goes, we can tweak somewhat with the graph, okay? So I can tell it where to be fast or where to be slow, but realistically, wherever those keyframes are, that's how long it's going to take to get from point A to point B, okay? Don't do this on yours. I'm just going to show you it so you can see. All right, there's that one. So I'm going to make a keyframe here. I'm going to make a keyframe there. Okay. So it takes roughly 4 seconds for this square to get across the screen. Okay. Whatever I do with the easing in and easing out, how long is it going to take to get across the screen? Still going to take 4 seconds, right? So the only thing that's changing is the speeds throughout that 4 seconds. That's all it's doing, okay? So you can only go so far in the graph editor or the speed graph before you can actually change anything. A lot of times what you want to do is first get your basic timing down. So you have a keyframe here, a keyframe here, a keyframe there. I preview it and kind of get a feel for how it's working. And then I'll go back and start tweaking the value graphs or speed graphs, okay? So if this didn't work out, I could say, oh, I want these to be faster, overall. Okay, so now that actually feels a little bit nicer of how it's moving by just tweaking where these keyframes are. I could spend 6 years in that speed graph and I would never be able to get it timed out the right way inside there by just tweaking what we did. And you can see, like, some of the times you're like, well, maybe I'll go even further. Yeah, that feels good too. Cool. All right, so we were right here, we were right there, we were right here. Okay. Another thing to pay attention to, don't move this up or down. Oops. So it's not going to even let me do it. There we go. So don't do this or that, because that will sometimes cause some like wonky behavior in your animation where it kind of like does some weird stuff. It automatically snaps, so as long as you're kind of close to that, you should be good. Okay, so now let's get out of this area. So we just turn the graph editor off. You'll notice that you have a new thing inside your timeline, which is these like stripes in there. When we click that zoom button, it zoomed our timeline into those keyframes. That's what happens. So we want to zoom back out. That button is no longer down here, but we do have this. This is the zooming for our timeline. So you can just click and drag that to the left, and it'll pull it back out. And then I will fix my work area again. There we go. And so now we all should be about there. Wonderful. Okay, so this is where we're going to stop it for the day. Okay, we've gotten to After Effects. We know a little bit about setting keys. We're going to save our work, so Control S. And we're going to close After Effects. And we should have, on our P drive, we should have a folder with our name and all of our files and stuff that we created today. That folder you want to make sure you back up. So you'll throw it onto your jump drive, onto your hard drive. If you have a Dropbox account, you want to put it there instead. However you're backing your stuff up, that's what you want to do. When you come in next time, there's no guarantee that that will still be there. Anyone at any point could come into this classroom and delete every folder on that P drive. It has happened before. Sometimes there's a computer glitch and they have to pull the station and then do whatever, okay? So back up that folder. When we come in next time, we will continue working on this. We will go over more principles of animation. The homework for everyone in the class is to go to that School of Motion, sign up for that free thing, and then continue watching those videos, because those are going to be invaluable tools to understand not only what we're doing in class, but also the industry. And then for about 5 of you, what is your homework?
We have to do the survey.
Do the thing online, yes. The discussion board. Okay.
Survey?
What was that?
Do the online survey?
It's just the discussion board. You already did it.